Shalom Aleichem, good morning. Shalom Aleichem, good morning. Shalom Aleichem, good morning. Hayom Yom Chamishi. Today's Thursday, and it's Beis Tevis, the second day of the month of Tevis. Yesterday was the Chodesh. And Tevis is, as you know, the fourth month. And in the Hasidus, we're taught about the Chodesh Rabbi, that it represents Maaseh, right? The first month represents Achdus. The second month represents Machlokes. The third month represents Shalom, Torah. And the fourth month represents the idea of whatever the Torah is, in Ruchni, to come down into Gashmias. It's true of Tevis and it's true of Tammuz. And in Tevis, they have the Gemara that the Rebbe always quoted, Yerech Shaguf Nene Min Aguf. And he explains in Alpi Chasidus that the Guf of Asmos, the Musa in Sof Baruch Hu, is Nene from the Guf of Gashmi of a Yid that does physical mitzvahs. And it's not by coincidence that Baravi, Bachamish, or Chodesh, you have the incredible Mayed, for us, the most important Mayed in the Chassidish calendar for sure, Chamisha B'Tevis, like you have the Pasuk in Tanakh. But the Merkava was said Baravi, Bachamish, or Chodesh. I think the Merkava. Because Lahamed Rishikir Ela Maisa, and like the Rebbe Rashab said, Simchas Torah Tafresh Pei, no, Purim Tafresh Pei, Yosef Yitzchak, mehr wollen ganz sein. Nicht mit unser Etzem, nur mit unser Espashtus. Yosef Yitzchak, mehr wollen ganz sein. Nicht mit unser Etzem, nur mit unser Espashtus. Und the Espashtus, this is the Chodesh Rabbi, Chodesh Tevis. And I obviously am teaching Basi Legani ahead of schedule, before Yishvat is more than a Chodesh away, maybe a Chodesh Arum. And the reason I'm doing it is because people want the Shiurim, want my Mamer. And today we're doing Perek Ches. I haven't decided whether I'm going to do it till the end of the Mamer or just do Perek Ches. The right thing probably to do is to make it two Shiurim, even though one of them will be short and the other one will be even shorter. Now, Rabbi say, I just finished editing and uploading. I didn't yet send it, but I uploaded it. The Shir and Perek Zayin and Vav Zayin, which I gave, which is almost 2 hours long. It's a very long Shir. And not only it's very long, but I'm not even sure how clear it is. I'm not even sure if I taught it in a way that the ideas come across. Shgia is mi yaven. Shgia is mi yaven. You try your best. And sometimes even your best is not your best. You know that your best is not your best, but it's as a gay welt. You have to move along. You can't just keep redoing things and redoing things. So, I'm going to give you a shir in Perek Ches, and I'm going to set up this shir. Remember, we're in the middle of a Mamer Basi Legani, and if you're listening to me and I'm talking to you, I'm going with the presumption that you listen to the classes prior to this one, so I can sort of go in mitten aninyan. I don't have to start from Shalom Aleichem. We're learning Basi Legani Tafshin Chof Daled. And Basi Legani Tafshin Chof Daled is based on the Perek Yudal of the Friedrich Mamer Basi Legani, which came out in Tafshin Yud, which the Rebbe gave out, as the Rebbe says, L'yemis Talkusei. The Tzavah of the Friedrich Rebbe, as the Rebbe referred to it multiple times. And we're in the middle of the discussion of the Sugya of Ein SOf, L'mata Mata Dein Tachlis. And in this Perek, there's two big ideas, as I've been explaining to you in every single shir I've given so far. In this Perek Yadalet, that explains the idea that godliness is found everywhere, there's two big ideas. The first big idea is that Ein SOf L'mata Dein Tachlis means even in the lowest klipas, and even lower than the lowest klipas, and as the Rebbe brought from the Nevuah of Chana, Hashem made it She'el Vayo'al, that even this is Yerid Tzerech Ali, even this is, quote, worth it, notwithstanding the degree of Yerida, that we're talking not somebody Yerida because the Eibush created Klipa, because a person is Chot, Upasha, Upagam, Veheveres Haderech, whether it's in Dvarim Haterim, or Dvarim Asurim, or the worst of all, is using Teira for Hepech HaTeira, Megala Ponim HaTeira Shaleika Halacha. Not only is it a cost there also, but made it She'el Vayal, the Yerida is so low, but it's worth it because of the Yerida Tzerech Aliyah, not Chas V'Shalom. That a person is saying Echta V'Yashov, but B'diavad we say made it She'el Vayal. that the Ein SOf nims lamata adein tachos Eibush is everywhere. Number one. Then comes number two. That even though godliness is everywhere and has an influence on everything, the nature of the influence of godliness on the world is that it's mania without being no. It moves without being moved. It touches without being touched. It's a one-way relationship. In the Lashon Harav, that in Ein SOf there's no ispoilus, in Ein SOf there's no shinui, and now we're going to add a third idea that in Ein SOf there's no ta'aruvus. There's no isarvus. That godliness is everywhere. Godliness is everywhere. It has to be. And even when it appears that godliness has gone through a shinui, the shinui is in relationship with us. But in relationship with the godliness itself, there is no shinui, like the mashal that I gave you in the beginning of the last class, which I think we're going to be learning in today's Mamer, today's shir, Perek, about mayim b'kli maguvan and oil b'kli maguvan. The light goes through a colored glass. So according to Chassidus, what comes out the other side is the same exact light. Even though you see it as red, that's not that the light has been changed, it's that your perception of the light has been changed, but as far as the light itself is concerned, there is no change at all. And I gave you a long discussion in the introduction to the last class, where I sort of pointed out there's a difference between how it's understood physically and how it's understood spiritually. And the truth of the matter is, maybe I don't even understand the physics correctly. Maybe it's physically also true. But certainly al pi Chassidus. Certainly al pi Chassidus. It goes through a colored glass, a prism, which changes it. And now you're seeing a rainbow, you're seeing an individual color, whatever the case is. That alteration, that change is to our perception, and the oid is completely unchanged. And that's the other side of the sugya of Ein SOf lamata adein tachos. Godliness is found everywhere and influences every place, and nothing touches him. He remains completely aloof. And the Rebbe gave us the mashal from Yosef HaTzadik, that it wasn't that Yosef HaTzadik was stronger than the Klipa didn't touch him. And he also gave us the mashal from the Baal Shem Tov, that the Baal Shem Tov was Ne'elam Es Halyenim, and he was me'ered, he was mispalal, that he should be able to help people in this world. In order to help people in this world, he has to relate to them on this worldly level. And if he's relating to people on this worldly level, that means he has to be here. But he's not here at all. He's not here at all. And somehow, without being here, he is here. In other words, without at all being affected by the environment which he's relating to that environment. No his spoilers, no shinoi, and nevertheless he's mashpia to this world. And that's the other side of the coin of Ein SOf, that the world doesn't touch it at all. And again, I want to make it clear, this is not meant to describe Ein SOf as cold and indifferent. Ein SOf gets involved. The Rebbe says, on the one hand it's Beskira Achas, on the other hand it's Bashgacha Pratis. On the page Kuftes at the top, the Rebbe gave us the two sides of the coin. And I must be honest that the last class went on for so long, so when I got towards the end I was rushing. But the duality of this, which is described on the first half of page Kuftes, is really worth verbringing about. That on the one hand you say that the Eibishter's involvement in the creation is Bepirtei Pratis, has a specific and a detailed involvement in each aspect of the creation. And at the same time, it's all part of one single awareness. This duality explains the idea of Ein SOf lamata adein tachos. Godliness is found in everywhere, and in everything, and it affects and creates and gives life. Mahava machai, like we learned in the first half of this Mamer. Every single being, and at the same time, the way it creates and gives life to every single being is in the kind of way that, as far as the Ein SOf is concerned, there's no change in the Ein SOf at all. Not because the Ein SOf doesn't care, but because the Ein SOf is Ein SOf b'yetzim. So in Perek Ches, the Rebbe says, "Umamshach b'hamayim." He continues quoting from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamer. And I already told you that if I was writing this Mamer, I would have put in the beginning of Perek Vov the whole quote. I wouldn't have stopped where they stopped. The whole first paragraph of Perek Vov and Perek Vov is a quote from Frierdiker. I would have added these few lines and made it into one sugya, because the B'klalos is one sugya. Shatam lekach, the reason for this is she'er hamachaya, that Ein SOf, which comes down into this world in order to provide havoya and chayas, and even koyach, that ein beishin if spoilers klal. There's no, notice how he keeps, before in the beginning he kept on saying first is spoilers and then shinui. Now he's saying first shini and then is spoilers. Olafish ein misaref, because it doesn't get entangled. Ein SOf does not get entangled. Godliness does not get entangled. This is a new idea. And I'm going to read on va'inyan bazeh, the meaning is the simple fact that Ein SOf is too far removed from having a relativism to the world. That Ein SOf is too far removed from having a relationship with the world. Bein Ein SOf la mata mata, being godliness and the places where godliness goes. Ein tam masbik is not enough of a reason. Shalei yispal v'lo yishtane, that it shouldn't react and shouldn't change. And here his palace is before Shina. Notice. Ein SOf is removed, right? Richo ke'erech and richo ke'shayches. Two expressions, 3 lines on top. It's removed in its worth, and it's removed in its possibility of having a relationship. Godliness is very, very far removed from worldliness, and therefore, even though godliness not only is found everywhere, but affects, creates, and gives life to everything, it's in a way of belief spoilers and belief shinu. Says the Rabbi, you cannot define the belief spoilers and the belief shinu of Ein SOf simply because of this. Ein SOf is very far away from the world. It's Ein SOf, it's Mamer. But that's not enough of an explanation for why it relates to the world without the world touching it. So the Rebbe says, Ein Masbik is not enough. Even Ein SOf b'yetzim could be mispol and could be mishtane because of Elames, if not for the fact that there's a concerted effort. In other words, what's the difference between the first point that we discussed in Perek Vav and Zayin, that Ein SOf is Ein SOf b'yetzim, and therefore beli is spoilus and beli shinoi, and what we're discussing now is that Ein SOf is beli is arvos. The difference is that I'm going to use very graba asis for very edle inyan, whether the idea that Ein SOf is not hispol and not mishtane is because of the teva of the Ein SOf or because of the kavanah of the Ein SOf. Is it because the nature of godliness is that it cannot interface with things that are limited? Or is it the choice of godliness that it shouldn't be affected by the environment? And that's the chiddush of Perek Ches or Perek Vav and Zayin. In Perek Vav and Zayin, Ein SOf, I'm showing the words inside, 3 lines from the top of page Kuf Yud. It's Richo ke'erech v'hashayches, which I would write as 2 statements, Richo ke'erech and Richo ke'shayches. It's too far from being measurable in relationship with the worlds, and therefore too far from having a relationship with the worlds because it's Ein SOf b'yetzim. In other words, the nature of the Ein SOf, although it not only allows but requires that Ein SOf lamata mata adein tachas, godliness must be everywhere in order for everything to exist. At the same time, its richo ke'erech and richo ke'shayches does not allow that the world should affect the Ein SOf on a level of espas and shinoi. So that says, if the only reason why we were saying that Ein SOf is beli espas or beli shinoi is because of the tev of the Ein SOf, that is richo and richo ke'shayches, that wouldn't be a sufficient explanation. And he brings that ayah. In other words, that you have to have the idea of Ein Mis'arev, which the way I'm understanding Ein Mis'arev is not just the nature of the Ein SOf, it's the kavanah, it's the attitude, it's a decision made by Ein SOf not to be Mis'arev. And that's the difference between Perek Ches and Perek Vav and Zayin. Now let's read weiter. V'rai level, here proof. His slapjas on the Neshama beguf. On the Neshama is a lakus. The Neshama is a chelik lekam imal mamish. And the Neshama is exactly the opposite of Ein SOf, like I explained to you in the beginning of the previous year. That the nature of Ein SOf is that no matter where it goes, nothing touches it. And the nature of the neshama is that no matter how little of the neshama goes into the guf, the entire neshama is invested in the guf. Or as I described it to you in the last year, when you look at Ein SOf, the focus of the Ein SOf is its loyalty to its source. And because the source is Ein SOf b'yetzim, the Ein SOf does not have its spoilers, and Ein SOf does not have shina. And the nature of the neshama is its loyalty to the guf. And therefore, even though the neshama has to go through many tzimtzumim, it can go into a guf, the rest of the neshama, which is not in the guf, is loyal to that guf. Lashon have my modem is pnimi b'yetzim. Pnimi means it's engaged with the world, engaged with that particular person's body, that particular gilgul's body, in a way of pnimius, complete investment, that all the rest of the neshama, which is not in the guf, is also connected to that guf. That's why you cannot have one neshama at the same time in 2 gufas, because it's so pnimiistic, it's so dedicated to the guf. And as a result, not only the parts of the neshama that are in the guf are affected by mikri guf, by what happens in the body, but even the higher levels of the neshama effect. In other words, the neshama, which is a creation of godliness, is the exact opposite of godliness. Godliness interfaces with the world in the way that there's bli hispalas and bli shinui. And neshama interfaces with the guf in the way that there's maximum hispalas and maximum shinui. Let's read it. Notwithstanding how remote a soul is from a body, that they're literally opposites. Because the neshama is a lakus beyetzem, and as you know, the lakus of the neshama is called the lakus shirasa nivra. It has the mile of being a lakus, and has the mile of being a atzmi, an entity unto itself. And it comes into a guf which is mishcha de chivya. It's a zudek ezak mit hoit und beiner, fleish and beiner, as the Rashbats would say. And therefore, it's kashrus from the bringing together of such a godly entity and such a material being. Ein SOf, it requires a power which is wondrous to bring two opposites together. Written in the bracha of Asher Yotzar, that ein mafli lasis lechaberuch nies v'gashmis. When the neshama enters into the guf and fuses with the body, mispa'eles haneshama mimiknei haguf, the neshama responds to the happenings of the body. And this is not only the levels of the neshama that are be'eslapshus, but since the whole neshama, that means the chaya, yechida, and even higher, are loyal to that guf because of the principle that the neshama is the pnimi biyetzem, are also in a way of his spoilers and shinim what's happening in the guf. And therefore, if a neshama, which is also a lakus, has a relationship with a guf which is also a marvel, also a pele, in a way of his spoilers and shinui, you cannot say that the bli spoilers and the bli shini of ein SOf is because of what the nature of the ein SOf is. It has to be the choice of the ein SOf. That the nature of ein SOf is ein SOf b'yetzem, and therefore it's richo ke'erach and richo shachis. It's not enough, and you have to have this additional point. Ve'ilu ha'era laki ha'mahava machaya, godly light, which is doing more for the world than the neshama is doing for the guf. Like it says in the Perek at the end, because the neshama is simply giving life to the body. Ein SOf is not only giving life to the world, it's creating the world and giving life to the world. So the investment of Ein SOf in the world, in a way, is more than the investment of the neshama in a guf. And yet the neshama's investments in a guf is absolutely bespoilus and absolutely beshinoi. And the investment of Ein SOf in the world is absolutely without bespoilus and absolutely without shinoi. That it's ein mispol, ein mishtana. So there has to be a reason that's more optimistic. Godliness decides that its relationship with the world is without becoming entangled. And if I'm understanding it correctly, this last point is saying that it's not just because the teva of Ein SOf is that it's Ein SOf b'yetzem, but it's because the kavona of Ein SOf is that it should relate to the world in such a way that it's not b'yesarvas. There's no ta'aruvas, there's no entangling. Ve'ilu, as opposed to the godly light, which both creates and gives life, which means godly light, Ein SOf, is doing more for creation than the neshama is doing for the guf. The neshama is only giving life to the body; it's not creating the body, like it says in Shari Yichud at the end of Perek Vov. And that Ein SOf is not just giving life, but it's creating. So there's more of an investment of Ein SOf in creation than there is of a neshama in the guf. Yet the neshama's relationship with the guf is that it has a spoilers and shinui, because that's what the Eibishter wants. And it ain't safe relationship with the world, it's ein mispal ve'ein mishtan. There's no ispaz, there's no shin. So the Rebbe's point is that it's not just a natural phenomena, that the distance of ein safe from creation does not allow for the ispaz. And the shinoi, the way I'm understanding, it's like a choice, it's a kavona, that it should be an eifin she'ein misad, that doesn't intertwine, it doesn't entangle with the world. Now, you know, my job is to teach Chassidus, not to create Chassidus. Such a simple statement that it's almost stupid to say. I'm not supposed to invent a Mamer, I'm supposed to teach you the Mamer. Anytime people always ask me, you just said, I said, if I'm saying, don't even waste your time with it. I hope it's Divrei Harav. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say something, okay? Where do you have the word Ta'aruvis? Where do you have the word Ta'aruvis in Chassidus? That here he says, Ein SOf. There's no Ta'aruvis. The word ta'aruf is you have by klipa, by toyu, right? In kedusha, there's something called the scalulus. Everything is interconnected, but in an orderly way. In klipa, everything is interconnected, but as the Russians used to say to me when I taught them in Russia, it's all confused, all entangled. That's what the word taruvas appears there. And when Chassidus talks about tayu and taruvas, one of the ideas that Chassidus says is that the madreg of chokhmah is above the taruvas. Why do we say b'chokhmah is beriru? That the true removal of the taruvas, the true ordering of the disorder comes from chokhmah, because chokhmah is not misarif. The nature of chokhmah is it has no relationship with the creation at all. In other words, the creation does not affect it, and because the creation does not affect it, chokhmah is the ultimate clarifier of the creation. And perhaps this is the kavanah, the idea that it ain't safe is not just b'li spoilers and b'li shin, but also b'li taruvas is like a chokhmah quality. The nature of its relationship with the creation is such that what the creation is doesn't affect what it is. Because that's the kavanah of chokhmah, to be involved in the world in such a way that there's no relationship with the world. Now I'm making up this mashal, I'm making up this comparison, and obviously I could be very, very wrong. But I'm trying to find oisius for what's unique about the idea of Eini Misadav, how Eini Misadav is different than Eini Mispal and Eini Mishtana. So the basic difference is that Eini Mispal and Eini Mishtana means the nature of Ein Sof doesn't allow for Espoilus and Shinoi. And Eini Misadav is that the Kavanah of Ein Sof doesn't allow for a Ta'aruvus. And perhaps that's a way of explaining it, that it's similar to the idea of that the reason Chokhmah is able to be Mavarer because it's above his Arvos. Ein Sof has a Chokhmah property, and the Chokhmah property in the Ein Sof doesn't allow whatever is going on in the world to have any effect on the Ein Sof whatsoever, other than the Ein Sof can fix it. But that's as much as I'm going to say as a way of commentary. But this is certainly true, that this point in Perek Ches, which is based on the latter part of the Perek Yudalet in the Mamer of the Friedrich Rebbe, that in addition to B'li his spoilers and B'li Shina, there's also B'li his Arvos, is that it's not just the Teva of Ein Sof, because if it's Richo Ke'eref and Richa V'Shayches, there's no espouse, there's no Shina, but because it's a choice. The Eibishter wants to relate to the world in such a way that it relates to the world and the world does not relate to it, as opposed to the relationship between the Neshama and the Guf. And this is the third idea. It's Eine Mispal, Eine Mishtane, which we spent 2 hours talking about yesterday and the day before in my recordings. And now we're adding B'li Esadvus. That the nature of Elokus is that it doesn't have any teruvas. The world cannot entangle it, get it caught up in its messes. The Rebbe proceeds to read from the Friedrich Rebbe's Mamer. It says in the pasuk, Ein Kodesh Kavaya, as we discussed at length in the beginning of the previous year. There's many things that are called Kodesh, but nothing is holy like Havaya. And as I explained in the beginning of the last class, this means specifically the Elokus of Mamalik Alalm, and that even though it's Beislapshas and Begilui, it's Ein Kodesh Kavaya. There's no Espilus, there's no Shini, because there's no Taruvis. V'is, the Bezer says, Karma Kadishin, there are many things that are holy. But relates Kodesh Kavaya, nothing is holy like Havaya. And he explains the Kodesh Havaya, the holiness of Shem Havaya, the Madrega Mamalak Alalmin, Eine is different than Kamei Kama Kadishin, the Seder Ishtalshus, and other ideas in Seder Ishtalshus that are also called Kiddush. And the ideas other than Mamalak Alalmin, that are also called Kedusha, are higher than Mamalak Alalmin. They're Sevav Kalalmin, they're eagle. But they're different. Why? The Kadishin Seder Ishtalshus, the holiness in other phenomena, besides for the Havaya of Mamalak Alalmin, that exists in Seder Ishtalshus, that are removed from Seder Ishtalshus, is the Kodesh removed till they're holy and removed from Ishtalshus, but Kedush Shasam Hu, She'ein and Boyim Be'eslapshus, the reason they're holy and removed is because there's no Eslapshus. In other words, they're simply separated from the creation, so therefore they're removed from the creation. Aval, however, Kasher Mislapshim, if the Madreges of Seviv Kalam, if the Madreges of Igulim would somehow have his slapshus, the worlds would have a hold on them, and there would be his spoilers, and there would be shinoi, and there would be taruvas. Utfisa pale shinoi. And if the worlds would have a hold on the higher madreges of Ein Sof, it would affect his spoilers and his shinoi and taruvas. So he's saying higher madreges of Ein Sof are removed from the world because they're technically removed from the world. And if when they were to get involved in the world would absolutely affect in them his spoilers and shinoi and taruvas. Mashenkin Kadosh Havaya, the lowest Madrega of Havaya, which is the Madrega of Mamalek Alalmin, Shubachinas Eir, which is the Madrega of Eir. And again, I am going to assume that Eir means Gilui, and Islapshas, the Eir of Mamalek Alalmin, is Ein Dema La Kadish, and Seder Ishtalshlus is different than the other holinesses in Seder Ishtalshlus. That although it's lower and it's closer to the creation, it has a property which is greater than the higher Madregas of Ein SOf, which are above Seder Ishtalshlus, which is Vumash Ein Mislabish. It goes into Elames, and it's misachid with Elames, and it's never in a way that the Elames have a hold on it. V'kasher bo b'yislapshus, and even when it comes to b'yislapshus. In other words, it's revealed in the Kelim of Atzilus. And through the Kelim of Atzilus, you have, which is the Koyach, as we discussed in the previous shade. It comes into a Shini Amahus in the lower worlds. In the Madrega of Koyach, as you're going to see on the next page, Hare Eine Bebechinas Tfisa. The Lakus of Mamalek Alalmin goes into Kelim of Atzilus. B'manadili, as the Rebbe called it in the previous year. And the Kelim don't have a hold on the Eir. And the world don't have a hold not on the Eir and not on the Kelim. And this is unique, that although on the one hand it's closer to the creation than the other in Yanim of Ein SOf, it's still Kaddish. And this is a different kind of Kiddush. The higher Madregas of Ein SOf are Kaddish because they don't get involved, but if they were to get involved, they would not be Kaddish anymore. This Madreg of Kedusha, the lowest Madreg of Kedusha, is unique, that Kama Kadishin in Blaze Kaddish Kavaya, notwithstanding that it's close to creation in the kind of way that the creation has no hold on it. Lefi sheini misaref. There's no taruvis. And again, the point that I made before in those couple of minutes where I allowed myself to say something without a proper source, that it's al derech the inyan of chokhmah, that taruvis doesn't touch chokhmah. That's why chokhmah is beriru. Chokhmah is able to create clarity in all kinds of confusion without getting dirty, without the birur bilvushi hamizbarer, like you have in so many places in Chassidus. This is a birur b'derech oir, because it's an eir atzmi. This property of bilti his arvus is not the nature of Eid, it's the kavanah of Eid. The nature of Eid is that zricha ke'erech and icha shayches. But beli taruv is not just the nature of Eid, it's the purpose. This Eid was purposed by Atzmas and Hussein Sav Baruch Hu, that it should come into the world and be in a way of gili, and yet there's no hispailis, there's no shini, and there's no taruv. And he gives you the example that I gave you at length in the beginning of the previous class. So now I'm going to just repeat it briefly, of the idea that light goes through a colored glass. Light on here shines, even though the light is physical. And it's shining through a physical prism, the way it emerges through that physical pyramid that doesn't get entangled by the prism. For example, light that shines through a glass. So you have a red glass, which the Rebbe is going to say in the parenthesis is Gevura. Zechuchis Yeruka, which is Teferes, and Zechuchis Levana, which is Chesed, parenthesis. And you have this in the footnote in the Perek as Mamer, the Rebbe writes this, that Machatavas Aduma Yeruka Levana is because there's a three kavim. Aduma is smell, Yeruka is Imtsoy, and Levana is Yamin, Chesed. Says the Rabbi Sheshcha, look at Marasel, there's a very big difference between these three colors. So the light goes through three different glasses and takes on three different shades. Or the light goes through a prism and splits it up into a spectrum, into a rainbow, and you have this color here, and this color here, and this color here, from shorter wavelengths to longer wavelengths, from blue to red, and so on. So the light's been changed. So the Rebbe says, the light is exactly the same as it was before. It's taken on none of the colors that you see in the glass. The light shines due to the glass, and because of the glass we perceive a specific color, we perceive a rainbow, but the light, even after it goes through the rainbow, is exactly the same, we're just not seeing it. Now how this works in the physics, I don't know, but this is the Chassidus. The light goes through the kelim, right? The one in the loch, the kelim of bria, what the Rebbe called before koyach. I'm going to have it barichas on the next page, and it comes into the lower world in a way that has a shina mahus. And as the Rebbe said, and he's going to say more, that in the madreg of koyach you could say about a lakus tvisa, which means hispoilas, shina, and taruvis. But it's two opposites. Oyed is one. Included in oyed is chayis. Included in chayis is koyach. When koyach emerges from chayis and emerges from oyer, it's only emerged to itself. When you see a particular color of the rainbow emerging from white light, that perception is only to that color. To the white light, it's as much as a part of the white light after it's been emerged as before. It hasn't changed. Ein Sof's relationship with the lower worlds is that even when the Ein Sof goes into Kelim and it comes out as the oil of the Keli, which is called Chayes and Koyach, that you see a specific color, that change is only to that perspective. It's only to that point of view, to that level. But as far as the oil is concerned, everything that's emerged from the oil is still a part of the pshitas and the actos of the oil, and there's no spoilers, and there's no shin, and there's no ta'aruvas. And he gives you a physical example. That the physical light is changed by the prism, it's changed by the colored glasses, but the change is only to the perception of the beholder, and the light is exactly the same as it was before. And again, in the mashal, I don't know how it is. In the physics, I know how it is. And the nimshal, that's Ein Sof. Ein Sof is pasha b'tachas apshitos, even when it goes into kelim, and it emerges out what's called oil of the keli, b'manan diloch, as being a different mahus. And the world is able to relate to it as a particular koyach, or whatever the case is. To the oil, it's still a part of the pshitas of the oil as it was before those tzimtzumim took place. And even after the light goes into the prism and it changes colors because it's been affected by the glass, when the light goes through a colored glass, you perceive colored light and not white light. You perceive only one wavelength rather than all the wavelengths. That Pasha doesn't appear to be plain, but rather Adam only red, or Yadak or only yellow or green, and so forth. And the light emerges in a kind of way that it appears to have a relativism to the glass, and the glass is able to affect the change in it. And of course, benimshal, how would you understand this in nimshal nelakus? It's in islapshus eid. It's the manifesting of light of mamalakalam, which is we're calling in kodesh kehawaya. Lahav is to create, lahach is to give life. And it seems to us that the Ein Sof is so engaged in the world that it's been changed so thoroughly to provide havaya and to provide chayas, creation and life to each individual creation distinctly. The light is not changed because it's not entangled. And in the mashal, what the Rebbe is saying is that even when the light is changed, it's only changed to the perceiver of the light through the glass, but to the light it's as much one after as it was before. And the nimshal is true of Ein Sof. Let's read one more line. The same is true in the nimshal. There's godly light that gives creation to the world and life to the world, and in so doing it goes into kelim, not just kelim of atzilus, which are barely a metzias and a barely a gvul, but even kelim de biyah, which cause it to be a shini hamahus, which is called koyach, which seems to be a significant change in the light. Says the Rebbe, that change in the light is only to the perception of the beholder. But to the light, to the Ein Sof, it's as much without its spoilers, without shinoi, as it was before the tzimtzum, because she'enim mit'arv. It remains absolute. It doesn't allow itself to be affected in a real way by the environment in which it's invested. She'enim mishtana klal. It doesn't change at all. Ve'ein be'shum shinoi v'espaz. There's no change. There's no effect. The world has no effect on it because somehow it's doing this duality, there's two things. It's coming into elements, it's going through tzimtzum and taking on change in the spoilers, and none of the tzimtzumim really happen. The Eid is still pashut. The Eid is still b'li shinoi, b'li spoilers, b'li shinoi, because of b'li ta'aruvas. So now we have a third idea, right? The first two ideas were b'li spoilers and b'li shinoi. And the third idea is because of b'li ta'aruvas. And if I'm not incorrect, and I've been making this point in this class very emphatically, the first two are sort of the teva avoid, and the third is the kavana avoid, that it should not allow itself to have ta'aruvas. V'kol all of these three ideas, that Ein Sof on the level of avayit, level of malikalam, is b'li spoilers, b'li shin, ta'aruvas is avisha Ein Sof b'yetzim. Because since the Ein Sof's nature is Ein Sof b'yetzim, in other words, the source is the Eibishter Kvayach, is Atzmus, and exists only by himself. And Eid is Mein Amoir. And therefore the Ein also has this property of etzem, that the nature of its Ein Sofius is that it is by itself an Ein of Ein Sof. Al Kain Hirigam is Pashtu said the way the Ein comes into the worlds and reveals itself in the worlds, even in the Madrega, Mamalak Alamanu, B'chinas Ein Sof. Which means Shanim Shabachol Amadregas is drawn into all levels. Ad Amadrega Yisachrein Ve'Yisachtain is the lowest, the last, and the lowest levels of Bakol Mokim Shonim Shach, and even though it's creating everything and giving life to everything in a way that on the one hand is very specific, and on the other hand it's all part of a single unity. It's Einim Ispol, Einim Ishtan, doesn't react to the environment in which it's involved with, is not changed by the environment in which it's involved with. And I added the words Ve'enim Esadev, Elu Pshitas B'yetzem Kan. It's the same as it was before. So Ein SOf was designed by the Eibishter to get involved in the creation and be responsible for the creation and its purpose in the kind of way that Ein SOf nimta lamata mata dein tachlis, and at the same time the world doesn't touch it at all. And now we go to page Kuf Yud Aleph. I wish to explain it. On this next page, the Rebbe is going to go back to the discussion of Ein and Kayach, which was all mentioned before. Where was it mentioned? It was mentioned on page Kovav, in the quote from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamer. And we're going to draw a distinction. We're going to say that Oir relates to the world Bali Shine, Bali Hispoilus, and Bali Taruvis. And Koyach is with Hispoilus, and is with Shine, and is with Taruvis. So although the next Perek, you see, if you look at Kuf Yud at the bottom, Ad Kan L'Shine, that's more or less the end of the Perek. The quotes from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Perek. So L'Chayda, the next page, Kuf Yud Aleph, is all Biur. But this Biur really is a throwback to something that the Frierdiker Rebbe said earlier on the page about the difference between Oir and Koyach. I already explained this to you before in the last class, that in the Maimonides you have Oir and Koyach, right? There's the Sugi in Samach Dalko, Oir and Koyach. Here he brings it from Samach Vov. But the Rebbe, of course, brings it in the Basi Legani, is that in Tanya you have three bedregas, Oir Chayes and Koyach. Oir and Koyach, and Oir Chayes and Koyach all come from the Eibishter, right? The Eibishter is the source of Oir, it's called Moir. The Eibush is the source of Chayes, and the Eibush is the source of everything, Koyach. But the way it plays out in Ishtalshalos, it's not that the Eibush has three separate ideas: the Oir idea, the Chayes idea, and the Koyach idea. It's the idea that the Oir includes everything. And when you make it a partial tzimtzum in Oir, you have a concept of Chayes. And when you make a further tzimtzum in Chayes, you have a concept of Koyach. Meaning Koyach is a part of Chayes, and Koyach and Chayes are both a part of Oir. And Oir Me'en Amoir means that within Oir, which is a reflection of the source, you have the possibility for Oir Shaba'ir, Chayes Shaba'ir, and Koyach Shaba'ir. Now, of course, it gets complicated because there's something called Kavana. In Atzmos, you have to have the idea of Koyach separate from the idea of Chayes and the idea of Oir, otherwise it wouldn't exist in Oir. But the way it exists in Oir is Koyach is not separate from Chayes, and Koyach and Chayes are not separate from Oir. They just emerge from one another in steps. And as I explained to you before, the understanding of this Mamer, that Ein SOf is B'li Hishtanos, B'li Hispoilus, B'li Hishtanos, and B'li Taruvis. And Koyach is with his spoilers, with Hishtanos, and with Taruvis, is that even though Koyach is a part of Oir, Koyach is a piece of it. Now it's a separate Kavon in Atzmos, but the way it comes down, Koyach is a part of Oir. As Koyach comes into Eilames, to Koyach, there is his spoilers and Shinoi, and in Taruvis. But as Koyach is a part of Oir, that very same Koyach is Beli his spoilers, Beli Shini, and Beli his Arvas. It's like the light being colored to our perception and not being colored to the light itself. And in order to explain more this idea that Ein SOf is involved in the creation on a level where it's not only giving life to the creation, it's giving it its very existence, and at the same time it's Beli his spoilers, Beli his shtanos, and Beli taruvis, he elaborates further on the juxtaposition of the difference between Oir and Koyach. And now let's learn. Kfi The Rebbe Rashab explains. Now, this is the last of the Rabbeim, right? You know that the Rebbe in the Basi Legani quotes all the Rabbeim, the Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, the Alter Rebbe, the Mittel Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe Rashab. And it appears that more or less the Rebbe is quoting them in order. Okay, maybe not. In page Kuf Beis, you have the Alter Rebbe and the Baal Shem Tov. Yeah, and I put them in boxes. On the top of Kuf Dal, you have the Mezritcher Magid. And after that, the bottom of Kuf Dal is the Mittel Rebbe. The bottom of Kuf Vav, he brings the Tzemach Tzedek, and again the Mittel Rebbe. And then, of course, from the bottom of Kuf Zayin down is the Rebbe Marash, and now he's bringing the Rebbe Rashab. So maybe with the exception of the Alter Rebbe being mentioned along with the Baal Shem Tov, they're in order. The Baal Shem Tov, the Magid, then the Mittel Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, and now the Rebbe Rashab. The difference between the idea of godliness and the level of Eir, and the idea of godliness level of Koyach. The focus of the word Eir is that reflection of the source, and it's being reflection of the source. Kama Kadishin Inim Leis Kadosh Kavaya is Belias Padas Belishin Vitaruvis, and Koyach is the opposite. The highest details within a person, which is in Yenaseichel of intelligence, which is Reish is Agilim Etzem HaNefesh. It's the first case where the neshama, that by itself is an etzem, emerges a particular property, right? The neshama is like godliness. Godliness is one and infinite. Included in the one infinite godliness is infinite tools, Sviras and gates, including Chochmah. The same is true of the neshama. The neshama is one and infinite. The first detail to emerge from the infinity of the neshama is Seichel. So if you want to describe the etzem neshama as being oir, and the seichel of the neshama as being koyach, and the same with Trubi Lamaila, right? The etzem of ein sof is oir, and the koyach of ein sof is seichel and chochma. It's really coming from oir. Oir descends into chayes, which then descends into koyach. But in the madreg of koyach, it's distinct tools, it's distinct characteristics. And of course, Chassidus, when it talks about the shoyresh, speaks about how in atzmos there's a kavanah that there should be koyches. But the way it manifests is everything manifests through oir. Oir becomes chayes, becomes koyach. But in the madreg of koyach, it's different than the way it is in oir. Seichel, as it is in the madreg of koyach, is different the way seichel is a part of the oir. Says the Rebbe, ein be'efen shuer poshet. You could never say about any tool which emerges from the pshitas hanefesh, or which emerges from the pshitas of the madreg of oir, is playing like the oir itself. Elovufen shel keach. It's in a way of keach. Koyach means a tool. Koyach means a tool. Koyach means a specific existence for a particular purpose and function. I like to translate koyach in three ways. It's a strength, it's a tool, and it's a potential. But its existence is defined by what it's going to do, not by what it is, right? Oir is defined by what it is. It comes from the Eibishter. Koyach is defined by what it's going to do. It's going to create an yonim of seichel, or it is an yonim of seichel, but it's all about the metzias of seichel. That the concept of koyach, by definition, which means that in oir you have also the idea that there's going to be particular characteristics that are going to emerge to serve a particular purpose, it's sheshayach beishine v'espaus, their very natures that they change, and their very natures that they react, and that the very natures that they entangle, they get involved in what they're studying. So although koyach comes from oir, and the way koyach is included in oir, it's oir, when koyach emerges from it by going to kelim dilach, the kelim of Yah, it comes out as a separate entity where there is an inyan from shinui, there is an inyan from the spoilers, there is an inyan from shinui, there is an inyan of asarvas. And he proves it by using ideas as a model. V'zehu, which is why gam shebeseichel yesh lukidargis, we find in ideas differences, higher ideas and lower ideas. Yesh seichel pnimi, seichel chitzeni, deeper ideas and more superficial ideas. Seichel amok, which means deeper ideas. Seichel shutchi, and a more superficial idea. So, how do we translate pnimi and chitzeni? Seichel pnimi means a seichel which is more close to the purpose of something, and seichel chitzeni would mean something which is more close to the form of something. And seichel amok means an idea which is representing the pnimius and the chitzenius in a deeper way. And seichel shutchi means something which is representing the pnimius and the chitzenius of seichel, or the seichel pnimius, the chitzeni in a more superficial way. Ve'inyan zeh, that this phenomena, that there's a world of ideas, and the idea creators, and idea pursuers, and idea processors, and idea masters, owners, which involves all this variety, pnimius and chitzenius, amkus and shitchius, It's not just because of the brains. That people have different kind of minds, physical brains, and because of different kind of minds. The kehach haseichel emerges from the nefesh different kind of ways. Shalom hamask. A person whose mind and brain is clearer and purer, is able to receive a deeper idea. And a person's seichel is not so clear and not so pure, he can only get an idea on the form level, not rather than on the substance level, and not on the deeper level, but on the superficial level, the shilchiyistic level. Says the Rebbe that's not true. And in footnote Yud Zayin he quotes the Samach Vav. You could say that seichel is like oir, that kehוי'ה is like oir, meaning that seichel is really one, just like oir is one, and the difference is only in the kelim. Just like we say about oir, right? As oir comes into all the various different creations in the world, and at the same time it's b'liyas spoilers and b'liyas shini and b'liyas harvas. You could say the same thing about seichel, and the Rebbe Rashab says, but it's not so. The idea that sichliim are divided, and there's levels, and there's differences, and there's reactions, and there's entanglement, is because of the very nature of seichel itself. The kehach haseichel, as it exists in the nefesh, the kehach haseichel, as it's included in the Ein SOf, but it's a particular kehach, is all about his spoilers, shini, and taruvas. He brings a proof. If we're going to say that seichel is really like oir, seichel is one and simple, and the differences are only because of the kelim and the brain, so then the Rebbe says, if you have a smaller brain, you should understand less. If you have a greater brain, you should understand more. And there should be no possibility for any change in that order. And sometimes you find a person with a lower brain can understand deeper. In other words, the quality of the kehei hamoyach doesn't entirely limit one's access to seichel, which proves that the difference between one person's mind and the other person's mind is not only in the brain, it's also in the kli, in the kehach haseichel. It would be impossible that a human being to understand the purpose of an idea, and then understand its form. Because if all the differences in the realm of ideas is all about the brain, the keli, the clarity and the purification of the vessels happens in a sequence, and it goes from lower to higher. You start off on a lower level and you gradually grow in your intellectual capability and sensitivity. I say that the order has to be shekchol shah adam evidiyes, the harder a person works im kli meach, in the tool of his brain, umaskel yes, and he uses this tool to be creative and intuitive in ideas more and more, that he should receive more light as he goes. And accordingly, it's never possible that a person who's less developed should grasp an idea that a person who's more developed doesn't grasp. If the shinoi between seichel of one person and the seichel of another person is entirely from the keli, it can't happen the other way. A person should first reach an understanding of a deeper idea, the purpose of an idea, and afterwards a person should reach an understanding of what's superficial and secondary. And yet the fact is that way, that some people can have very simple minds in a more rudimentary area of ideas, and very sophisticated minds in other areas of ideas, which shows that the difference between one's kehach haseichel and the other's kehach haseichel is not only about the brain, it's about the kehach itself, the neshama of seichel. Ve'en, it's impossible to say, perhaps, in other words, another way of getting around this question. The reason one person understands the depth or the purpose of an idea before he understands seichel chitzeni, the form of the idea which is secondary, is because now he's studying this sugya, so he knows it better. Which the seichel and level of pnimius, which I'm translating as the purpose of an idea, is connected. He's not involved in the other subject, to which the seichel of form is related. So perhaps you can still maintain the argument that seichel is like oir, which is as posher with achas apshitas, and it's one, and the difference is only with koyach, and the fact that a person can first understand something more pneumistic and then understand more chitainistic is because simply he's putting his brain there. We find occasionally that you're learning one subject And that one subject has a pnimius and a chitzenius. Somehow, yasik tchilas apratim apnimim shebeseichel. First, you'll get the aspect of that idea that have to do with its purpose. V'rak achakach yasik has the pratim achitzenium, and only afterwards will you get the form of that idea. Shebeseichel zeguf, and that idea itself. V'imkein muchrach leimer, and therefore you must say the difference between how one brain receives an idea and another brain receives an idea. It's not just because of the clarity and the refinement of the tool of ideas, which is the brain. The intellectual light which emerges from the neshama, right? The intellectual light emerges from the intellectual life, and intellectual life emerges from intellect on a level of oir, and oir, everything is pasha b'tachlabshut, it's achtos. The koyach haseichel, which emerges from chayes haseichel, which emerges from oir haseichel, oir, chayes, koyach, is by itself distinctive. Even though in oir everything is one, in koyach, even before there's any ken, there's any guf, it's already distinctive. So what we call the tool of seichel, not the light of ideas. I have to stop here. These are very edel and yonim. These are very fine ideas. They really are very fine ideas. I'm trying to figure out the shortest route between 2 points. In other words, I can give you long speeches now, but I really think that would be a big mistake. I've given long enough speeches on this Mamer already. Ein SOf is me'en amor. Godliness reflects God. God is one, light is one. God is everything, light is everything. And there are basically two levels, and the word basically is very provocative here. One level is where God is not missing anything. And one level is where God has everything. What's the difference between saying God is not missing anything and God has everything? The difference between saying Hashem isn't missing anything and Hashem has everything, which is sometimes called noise and koilel, yichos and koyach, is the difference between saying Hashem is absolutely one, and in the oneness there are no lacks, and saying Hashem is absolutely infinite, and in the infinity every single thing exists individually till infinity. And that's really the difference between the word oid and the word koyach. Oid is Ein SOf, godliness. Godliness is one. Anything that could possibly exist is part of that oneness, including Chochmah, and including Chesed, and including Netzach. And of course, we know about 10 spheres, and the Alter says that theoretically the sphere is same case. Hashem has infinite spheres, of which He chose 10 with which to create the world. Ein SOf Tesha, Ein SOf Achadosar. But there is the idea how that 10 or that infinity is a part of the simplicity of Ein SOf. That's called Oir. And then there's how they emerge to be distinctive. That's called Koyach. Now, where does koyach come from? Koyach comes from Oir. So there is koyach where it's a part of Oir, and it's koyach the way it emerges from Oir. Koyach the way it's a part of Oir is Oir. What does Oir mean? It's absolutely one. It's a level where the only thing you could say is Hashem is not missing anything. You cannot say Hashem. You can't say Hashem is smart. You could say He's simply not lacking what smarts is. You cannot say Hashem is kind. You can say that He's simply not lacking what kindness would give Him, or would come from Him as an act of kindness. So all the spheres, all the midas, all the tayrim, all the koyches, before they're koyach, they're oir. Before chokhmah is chokhmah, bina is bina, it's Ein SOf. But when it's part of Ein SOf, it's part of a pshitus, where we make this statement that ein kodesh k'havaya, even the way it's islapshus, in elamis, it's beli his spoilers, beli shinu, because it's beli taruvis. But when koyach emerges from Eir, and koyach emerges from Eir because the Eibishter wants koyach to emerge from Eir. But when koyach emerges from Eir, it is behispoilus, it is beshina, and it is betaruvas. And the Rebbe says, I want you to understand that when koyach emerges from Eir, it isn't only that the world makes it into koyach, and by itself it's still Eir. But even the koyach as it is by itself is already koyach and no longer Eir. Meaning the idea that Hashem has is not missing anything. And on a lower level He has everything. On this lower level where He has everything, when He extracts one tool from the Sfiras Enket, let's say called Chochmah, Seichel, that distinct emergent property called seichel or chokhmah that comes out of the level where godliness has everything and the higher level where godliness is lacking nothing, is a koyach because of itself, not just because of elamis. It has the rules of koyach before there's any guf and before there's any keli. And the rules of koyach are that it's a process. The rules of koyach are that it's work. The rules of koyach are that it's all about aspirlet, it's all about shini, it's all about aruvas. So the Rebbe spends this page explaining. It's based on the Mamer Samach Vov. The koyach HaSeichel doesn't have the interaction with the world where the world changes it and it changes the world only because of the world. It's because of the koyach HaSeichel itself. The nature of intellect is that it's beispoilus, it's called tfisa, and therefore beispoilus b'shini medarubas. And the 2 points that he brought were, number one, that sometimes you can understand the deeper idea before a shallower idea. And number two, sometimes you can understand the deeper idea before the shallower idea when they're both in the same subject. And you're involved in both of them, and yet somehow you get the pnimi before the chitzeni. Which proves that the koyach HaSeichel by itself has form, has definition, has distinction. And it's not only the kli hamoyach which determines the process by which ideas reach into individual person, the koyach HaSeichel is responsible as well. So what he's trying to describe is that when you're talking about koyach and oid, it's like the difference between oid and neshama, which you had at the beginning of the previous page. What did the Rebbe say on top of page kufyut? Right, the very nature of the neshama is that it's about loyalty to the guf, and every level of the neshama is beispalos and b'shini and metarubis because of the guf. Oid is not that way. Koyach is like a neshama. Its relationship with the moyach, the physical brain, the koyach HaSeichel's with the physical brain is that it's beispoilus, b'shini, b'taruvas, because the koyach by its nature is about hispoilus, shini, and taruvas, not just the brain. So the hard part of this subject is to appreciate that koyach emerges from oyer the way colors emerge from white light on the bottom of kufyut. And even when colors emerge from white light, the Rebbe argues, the change is only to the colors, but to the white light there's still a unity. The same is true koyach. Koyach emerge from oyer to koyach, but to oyer there's still a part of oyer. But in as much as a koyach exists separate from oyer, the nature of koyach is that it's not just the guf and the keli which affects the change in the koyach, the changes in the koyach itself. That there should be hispoilus and shini and taruvas. So the Rebbe Rashab is juxtaposing, is comparing and contrasting Eid and Koyach. Just like we compared Eid and Neshama, compared and contrasted Eid and Neshama in the previous page, we're now comparing and contrasting Eid and Koyach. But our kavanah in our Mamer is not to explain Koyach. Our kavanah in our Mamer is to use Koyach as a medium of understanding Oyer better. So we now continue. Mashenke meina Oyer is different. After yesh shinui ben yed hashemesh Eid alavana. There's difference in different kinds of light. Obviously sunlight is different than moonlight and candlelight and torchlight. The different luminaries. Says the Rebbe, Ein SOf the seichel pnimi v'seichel chitzeni. Those differences are not like the differences in ideas. Because the differences in ideas have to do with the luminary itself. One brain, one koyach HaSeichel can have a pnimis and a chitzenius. Kivin shashinoi, while in light and the source for light, there isn't that. Sunlight, moonlight, candlelight, and torchlight is not different because of what light is, it's different because of what the source is. If the light comes from a greater source, it's going to be a bigger light. And this light is connected to the moon, which is a smaller source, so it produces less light, and the same is also true on even lower levels. This is the reason why there's differences between sunlight, moonlight, torchlight, and candlelight because of the volume of the source. Light is a constant. Light hasn't changed at all. Light is one thing, reflection of a source. If the source is bigger, there's going to be more. If the source is small, there's going to be less. But light is always going to be the same. But kehוי'ה is not that way. Kehוי'ה is not that way. Kehוי'ה means that in the neshama, once there is a kehוי'ה haseichel, that kehוי'ה haseichel changes. It certainly changes from person to person. And even with one person itself, there could be shinuyim. It's not just there's a source and therefore there's light. There's a dynamic source. And therefore dynamism within the source. And that's the source of the dynamism when that source interfaces with the physical brain. Now I know that I should be explaining this better. She's giving you 4 examples of a luminary: the sun, the moon, a torch, and a candle. And it's interesting that he puts candle before a torch, even though a torch is bigger than a candle. There are 4 different sources for light, but he's saying light is a constant. The amount of light changes, but what light is a constant. And of course this interfaces what we said before about light going through a prism, taking on colors, that the light remains the same. להמשיך שם, and the Rebbe Rashab continues and he says, sunlight as it comes into this world is different than the sunlight that leaves the sun. And if light is a constant, and the difference is only in the quantity of the light, based in the size of the luminary, so the light that emerges from one luminary should always be the same. The sun is really also created and also limited, which means it's not really light, which is a really disturbing proposal. And then in Yud Ches in the footnote he adds, Shemashem Ein Mer Kol Kach Lamata is not because of the air, because Achruri is Shaba Avid. And Achruri is V'Achruri is Shaba Avid. If sunlight were truly light, it wouldn't change at all. He says, first of all, the difference between the sun, the moon, and the torch and the candle is the size of the light, or the luminary. Second of all, if it was truly the concept of light, it would never change at all, no matter how far away it goes from the source. And the fact that it does change is because it's gamke nivra bal gvul, and it's only a mashal for eid, it's not eid mamish. Now this statement, shashemesh or gamke nivra bal gvul, and its implications in the mashal of eid are radical and much. You could sit on this for a long time, but I want to move on. Okay, it's enough. Because this is only the mashal. So we're going to continue on the last line on page Kuf Yud Aleph, number 96. Avol kan meduber, here we're discussing this eid shehu ein sof b'etzem. We're dealing with godliness, which is ein sof b'etzem. Because its source is etzem, the light is also etzem, and its being ein sof b'etzem is the reason why it operates b'li his spoilers, b'li ishtanis, b'li taruvas. And therefore, gam kashen nimshach lamata mata. Even the way in Seif Nimshach lamata mata dein tachlis is be'efen she'u be'efen dein tachlis. It exists beyond there being a purpose. It's always everywhere and influencing and creating, giving life to everything. And at the same time, eini misarev and eini mispol and eini mishtanev. Because the Eibush is designed with the kavanah not to get entangled, it relates to the world. Whether we're allowed to have any effect on it, the world doesn't make an imprint on him, and doesn't make a change in any safe. And this Rabbi Sai is the second big idea of Perek Yud. The first big idea is ein sof nimshach lamata dein tachlis, and the second big idea is ein sof nimshach dein tachlis b'li his arvos, b'li taruvas, and therefore b'li his spoilers, and b'li his shinui. And ein sof has an influence on everything, and everything has no influence on ein sof. Now it's true that from comes chayis, and from chayis comes kehach, and on those levels you could say his spoilers and shinui and taruvas, but it's only as those levels are separate from the eir. As those levels are a part of the eir, it's still true that it's b'li his arvos, b'li his shinui, and b'li his spoilers. If you would say that this is confusing and deep and complicated, I would agree with you. But this is more or less the Perek Yud. That in order to explain oitze, the Rebbe explains ein sof lamata in case lamata dein tachlis, and oitze is going to be higher than both, as it says in this Mamer. And he dedicates 2 prakim to ein sof lamata dein tachlis, Perek Gimel and Yud Daled. But he argues these 2 sides, that ein sof lamata dein tachlis means ein sof is everywhere, and ein sof lamata dein tachlis means the lamata dein tachlis doesn't touch the eid at all. I'm going to stop now. And we're going to leave Perek Tes for a separate shir, although I figure it'll be quite short, but it's the right thing to do. Happy Thursday.